disbelief when I got the news that Nolan was missing. So when I got all the details surrounding the case that they told me he was out at Horn Island, and he came up missing or whatnot. I talked with his dad, and we just had conversation. That was kind of after the fact when they had found his body, because I was just giving the family their respect that they deserve.
What does a coach know about a player that no investigator will ever find inside a case file? How do you sit in front of a national camera and defend a community the entire internet is accusing, while the family of the young man you coached is still begging for answers nobody has given them? And when the men who shaped an athlete's whole life finally decide to talk, after weeks of silence, what makes their words powerful enough to divide a congresswoman, a coaching staff, and millions of people watching from home? For nearly a month, strangers online have argued about Horn Island. They've dissected photos, replayed clips, and built theories out of fragments. But the men who actually stood on the sidelines with Nolan, who watched him grow from a teenager into a college athlete, said nothing publicly until now. One of them sat down for a televised interview and pushed back against the loudest narrative on the internet. When the criticism came for him, he answered it with a message explaining exactly why he chose to speak. His head coach released a statement that reads less like a press release and more like a father's tribute. And two college coaches shared final memories so specific, so personal, that once you hear them, you will never look at this case the same way again. I have the actual recording of that interview. I have the statement the coach released when the backlash began. I have the words his college coaches gave in their final interviews about him. And tonight, I'm walking you through all of it, piece by piece, because nobody else is putting these voices side by side the way I'm about to. Before we go any further, do me one favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to True Crime Victims, because this channel follows confirmed reporting, documented statements, and verified interviews, never rumors. And this case is going to need every ounce of that discipline before it's over. Now let's begin. The first voice to break the silence belonged to Tracy Lampley, a coach from Nolan's years at Ocean Springs High School. On July 14th, 10 days after the boat trip, Lampley appeared on TMZ Live. Understand what that decision meant. At that moment, the story had already gone national. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump was representing the family. Reverend Al Sharpton had stood beside the parents in Harlem. A reward fund was climbing. And one question sat underneath everything. Did race play a role in what happened to the only black teenager in that group of friends? That was the question waiting for Lampley when the cameras turned on. And his answer surprised almost everyone. He said no. From his own experience, he told the interviewers, there was no racial tension at the school. He described a predominantly white campus, where black students and white students played together, grew up together, and got along. He wasn't reading a prepared script. He was describing the hallways and locker rooms he personally walked through, year after year. Then he talked about who Nolan actually was. A great young man, in his words, with a big personality. Someone people gravitated toward without him ever asking for attention. A young man Lampley remembered for a bright smile that seemed permanently attached to his face. A joy to be around, not complicated, not troubled, not surrounded by conflict. Just a presence that made the room lighter. Now, stop for a second and consider the position this put him in. Lampley is a black coach, speaking about a black former player whose death has become a national flashpoint over race in Mississippi. And on live television, he declined to feed the most explosive theories circulating online. Not because he claimed to know what happened on that island. He never said that. He simply refused to describe an environment he says he never witnessed. The reaction was immediate. Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett publicly disagreed, arguing the case is fundamentally about race. Social media split down the middle. Some praised the coach for honesty. Others accused him of protecting the town. Within a day, his name was trending for reasons that had nothing to do with football. So Lampley responded. The day after the interview, he posted a message explaining himself. He said he agreed to speak for one reason only: to shine a light on Nolan and the incredible young man he was. As one of his former players, he wanted the world to know his character, the impact he had on others, and the kind of person he'd been long before the headlines existed. Read that carefully. He never claimed to solve anything. He never dismissed the family's concerns. He drew one small circle around what he personally knew, and he stayed inside it. In a case drowning in speculation, that restraint might be the rarest thing you'll hear. But Lampley wasn't the only voice from that school. The head football coach at Ocean Springs, Jake Bramlett, released a statement of his own, and where Lampley's interview was conversational, Bramlett's words carried the weight of a man measuring every syllable. He called Nolan the kind of son, teammate, friend, and student every coach hopes to have in a program. He said Nolan carried himself with humility, treated others with respect, worked hard, led by example. 4 qualities, delivered without a single statistic attached. No mention of routes, run, or catches made. Because when Bramlett reached for what mattered, football wasn't it. Character was. Coaches write tributes all the time. What makes this one land differently is how perfectly it matches everything else being said by people who never compared notes. The school district's leadership described a remarkable student and brother, extremely kind, hard-working, someone who left a lasting impression on teachers, teammates, and an entire community. Different sources, same portrait. And that consistency is exactly what makes the next part of this story so difficult to sit with, because Nolan's journey didn't stop at graduation. He'd earned his next chapter, a roster spot as a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, heading into his second season with the Bears, which means there's a second set of coaches, men who knew him not as a hometown kid, but as a college athlete grinding toward a bigger dream. And when they spoke, they went deeper than anyone before them. Head coach Les George, 42 years old, gave an interview describing what it felt like to receive the news. Heartbreaking, he said. Hard to put into words. He talked about a player who did things the right way in every setting. The classroom, team meetings, workouts, practice. If something was supposed to be done, George said, Nolan did it. No shortcuts, no excuses. Then George reached for a phrase you don't hear coaches use often. He called Nolan a genuine person, the kind you occasionally cross paths with in life who is simply salt of the earth. And he explained precisely what he meant. Someone who wants to see the good in everyone. Someone who works to make the people around him feel accepted. Someone whose instinct, in every room, was generosity. If that sounds like a eulogy being polished, listen to the story George told to back it up. It comes from Nolan's first college game, the season opener. Every freshman dreams about that day, and Nolan never got a single rep, not one snap. He stood on that sideline the entire game. For most young athletes, that stings. Some sulk, some check out. George remembers something else entirely. He remembers how excited Nolan was that the team won, celebrating every successful play as if he'd made it himself, cheering for the teammates who got the opportunities he didn't. That's not a highlight. That's a window. And through it, you see exactly the person every other coach described. After the loss, George told reporters that football was no longer the most important thing for his program. Taking care of each other was. The college brought professional counselors to campus for Nolan's teammates and friends. The president of the school released his own statement, remembering a well-respected young man, popular among students and faculty alike, an entire institution, pausing for one freshman receiver who never recorded a college statistic. Ask yourself how often that happens. And still, the most devastating memory belongs to someone else. Even more, the wide receivers coach and general manager at Southwest, the man who recruited Nolan. the man who saw him for the last time. Moore's story goes back to Nolan's official recruiting visit. If you've never seen one, understand what that day represents. It's built entirely around the recruit, the facility tour, the uniform, fitting, the photos, the imagined future. Everything is designed to make one athlete feel like the center of the universe. Because, for that afternoon, he is. Nolan brought his younger brother along, and Moore remembers that boy standing off to the side, watching with excitement and pure admiration as his big brother tried on a college uniform for the first time. Here's where the memory turns. On the day engineered to celebrate him, Nolan's attention went to the kid watching from the edge of the room. Instead of soaking in the spotlight alone, he shared it. He pulled his little brother into the moment, into the experience, into a memory the two of them would carry together. Moore never forgot it. Speaking after Nolan's death, he reflected on that visit as the final time he ever saw him. Think about that. The last image a coach holds of his player isn't a catch or a touchdown. It's a teenager making sure his younger brother felt included on the biggest day of his own life. Moore also spoke about the season ahead, saying Nolan remains on his teammates' minds and that the team intends to lay everything on the line for him. Now I need to be direct with you, because this channel doesn't blur the line between emotion and evidence. Nothing you just heard tells investigators what happened on Horn Island. A coach's memory cannot establish a cause of death. Character is not forensic proof in any direction. These tributes don't confirm a crime, and they don't rule one out. What they establish is context. Who this young man was, according to every adult who supervised his daily life across 2 schools, 2 towns, and 2 chapters of his career. Respectful, selfless, disciplined, beloved. The descriptions never waver, no matter who's talking or when. And that consistency is precisely why this case grips the entire country. Because the official picture and the human picture are struggling to occupy the same frame. Here is what authorities have documented. Nolan was last seen on the island around 3 in the afternoon on July 4th. His friends returned to the mainland. He didn't. He was reported missing that night. 2 days later, a park ranger discovered his body along the island's northwestern shoreline. On July 6th, the sheriff stated no foul play was suspected, a single sentence that ignited fury across social media rather than calming it. Officials have framed this as a death investigation, one that remains active. The state performed its autopsy on July 7th, and those results are still sealed, pending toxicology. Investigators have interviewed roughly 60 witnesses. A grand jury review has been announced, and the district attorney has confirmed the evidence will stay out of public view until that panel examines it first. 60 witnesses, a sealed file, a grand jury. For a case officials initially leaned toward calling an accidental drowning, that is an extraordinary amount of machinery. It doesn't prove wrongdoing. Waters around those barrier islands are genuinely dangerous, and the county coroner has acknowledged receiving drowning victims from them for years. But it does tell you this: the people in charge understand that every conclusion here will be challenged, examined, and remembered. Which brings us to the collision waiting in Part 2. Because while the state's findings sit under seal, the family commissioned an independent autopsy of their own, performed by one of the most prominent forensic pathologists in America. His preliminary conclusions were announced on a national stage, and what he found, and what he says he could not find, has pushed this case into entirely new territory. Cause of death: undetermined. Manner of death: undetermined. And one sentence in his report that changed the conversation overnight. That examination, the disputed audio recording from the water, and the court filings the family submitted just days ago. That's where we go next. If you want the second part, the moment it drops, built on the same documented sources you heard tonight, hit the like button so this reaches more people searching for the truth, and subscribe to True Crime Victims with your notifications on. Because the questions in this case are only getting louder, and this channel will be here for every single answer. What happens when two forensic pathologists examine the same young man and neither one can tell you how he died? What does it mean when the second expert writes, in his own preliminary report, that he cannot rule out foul play, while the officials who found the body announced within days that they suspected none? And when a grieving mother stops waiting for the system and starts issuing subpoenas to the biggest technology companies on the planet, demanding every message, every photo, every location ping her son's phone ever produced, what exactly is she afraid the official record will leave out? Those aren't hypothetical questions anymore. In the weeks since Nolan's coaches spoke, this case has transformed. A private autopsy was performed, and its findings were announced from a national stage. A distress call recording surfaced. Then a disputed enhanced version of it set the internet on fire. A government document leaked describing his final afternoon. And just days ago, court filings landed that most people covering this story haven't even read yet. I have the autopsy announcement. I have the details of that marine document. I have the substance of those brand new filings. And tonight, I'm laying all of it out in order, verified piece by verified piece, because right now nobody else is connecting these documents the way I'm about to. Before we open the file, take 1 second. Tap the like button and subscribe to True Crime Victims, because this channel deals in confirmed statements and released records, never guesses, and with a grand jury looming. You're going to want a source that separates the two. Let's get into it. Start where the last chapter ended, with a family staring at an official direction they could not accept. Authorities on the coast had leaned toward accidental drowning almost from the moment the body was recovered. The family's answer was to bring in Ben Crump, the civil rights attorney whose name alone signals that relatives believe the official story is incomplete. And Crump attacked the drowning theory at its foundation. He pointed out that Nolan took swimming lessons as a child. He noted the teenager had visited Horn Island before. In his framing, a capable swimmer familiar with those waters doesn't simply vanish beneath them without explanation. Whether you find that persuasive or not, it's the argument, stated publicly, on the record. Then the family did something more consequential than arguing. They commissioned their own examination, and the support behind it tells you how far this case had traveled beyond Mississippi. Filmmaker Tyler Perry stepped up to cover the funeral costs. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick paid for the independent autopsy. Reverend Al Sharpton stood with the parents as a reward fund climbed past $125,000, and the case reached the floor of national conversation. The man chosen to perform that second examination was Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and the president of the National Medical Association, the oldest and largest organization of black physicians in the country. He conducted his autopsy on July 10th, 4 days after the body was found. And understand what a second autopsy is designed to do. It isn't performed to manufacture a preferred outcome. It places an independent set of expert eyes, with no ties to the local process, on the same remains. Sometimes the two examinations align completely. Sometimes they diverge. And when they diverge, that gap becomes the battlefield an entire case is fought on. On July 22nd, at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago, Crump stood before cameras and announced Mitchell's preliminary findings. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined, pending further investigation. Read those words carefully, because both sides of this fight heard something different in them. The examination found no skull fractures, no major fractures anywhere, no deep tissue injuries that clearly explained why an 18-year-old athlete was dead. If someone had beaten him, the body offered no obvious signature of it. But Mitchell documented one detail he could not explain away: a red discoloration on the back of the head, which he described as inconclusive, not proof of an assault, not dismissible as nothing, simply a finding, sitting there, unanswered. And then came the sentence that changed the temperature of this entire case. According to the family's legal team, Mitchell wrote that he could not rule out foul play. He didn't allege a crime. He declined to exclude one. In forensic language, that distinction is everything. And in public perception, it landed like a thunderclap. Now, here's where I have to slow down and give you what the headlines skipped, because Mitchell himself was honest about the limits of his own work. His report identified significant barriers to reaching a definitive conclusion. The most important one, he could not directly observe the airway and the lungs to check for water, and he could not directly examine the stomach's contents. Those structures matter enormously in a suspected drowning. He also noted that toxicology results had not been received when he wrote his preliminary findings. In his report, he explained why confirming how a person entered the water is especially critical when the deceased knew how to swim, which, in this case, he did. An outside expert went further. Dr. Michelle Dupré, a former medical examiner, reviewed the situation publicly and called the second autopsy's results equivocal. She explained that certain neck structures and organs had been retained by the original pathologist, which is a recognized forensic practice, but one that hampered the second examination, because those structures are essential for evaluating the possibility of strangulation. She said she understood why the first examiner kept them for further study, while acknowledging it left the independent review without complete answers. And before anyone treats her as a witness for the official side, hear her other conclusion, she called it premature that authorities announced no suspicion of foul play as quickly as they did. Until a full investigation is done, in her words, we simply don't know. Sit with that architecture for a moment. The state's autopsy, performed July 7th, remains sealed, awaiting toxicology. The independent autopsy is public and undetermined. One expert can't rule out foul play. Another says the very conclusion officials reached early was rushed. 2 examinations, 1 body. No verdict. That is the fault line running under everything else you're about to hear. And into that vacuum, the internet poured everything it had. A remote island with no cameras, no stores, no cell service, produces a thin official record, and thin records get filled by interpretation. The most explosive example arrived in late July, when an audio recording surfaced from the day of the trip. The original, released through Mississippi Marine authorities, captured a caller requesting help because the boat was taking on water and possibly sinking. Frightening, but consistent with a mechanical emergency. Then a tabloid outlet published an enhanced version and claimed that, buried in the background noise, voices could be heard asking whether someone was dead, saying Nolan's name, and telling someone to wake up. Sources connected to that reporting suggested the chaos in the background was panic over the sinking vessel. Within a day, an audio expert publicly disputed the enhanced version's claims. So what you actually have is one authentic distress call about a failing boat, and a contested interpretation layered on top of it. I'm presenting it exactly that way, because presenting it any other way would be fiction. The same pattern swallowed a viral video weeks earlier. A clip spread showing what thousands of viewers decided was a confrontation on the island, raised voices, tension, a fight forming. Then a young man named Tracestin Shepherd came forward on national television and said the yelling voice was his own, not evidence of an altercation involving Nolan at all. He also debunked a circulating photo, explaining it was taken on June 27th at a long-planned gathering, entirely separate from the holiday trip. He said the online speculation had fueled confusion and made it harder for anyone to focus on facts. And in a strange twist that shows how tangled this story has become, Nolan's own parents later said in an interview that they don't know Shepherd. Every layer of this case seems to generate another question about the layer beneath it. Running under all of it is the argument about race, and I'm going to give you both positions without picking one. Coach Tracy Lampley, as you heard in Part 1, said he never witnessed racial tension among the students who grew up playing together. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett took the opposite view, arguing this case is fundamentally about race. Nolan was the only black member of the group on that boat, in a state whose history makes his family's distrust impossible to separate from the investigation. His parents have spoken about the conversations they had with their son about navigating America as a young black man, while insisting they are not trying to force the case through any single lens. Nobody has resolved this debate, because the evidence that could resolve it is still under seal. I won't pretend otherwise, which brings us to the newest documents. The material this case will be argued over next. First, a preliminary email from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained by a national news network. Sent on July 5th and circulated to search crews, it recorded what witnesses had told investigators, that they saw Nolan consuming a large quantity of alcohol while partying on the island. The same document noted he was seen in the company of a young woman, later identified in media reports, whose relatives pushed back, saying the two spoke only briefly and that their family has cooperated fully with investigators. Weigh that document for what it is. Witness observations gathered within a day of the disappearance. Not toxicology, not a finding. The science that could confirm or contradict it is still pending. His friends, for their part, have publicly acknowledged drinking with him that day. Second, and most recent of all, the court filings. On July 29th, filings submitted in Jackson County Chancery Court revealed that Nolan's mother had issued subpoenas to 5 major technology companies, including Meta and TikTok. The demands are sweeping: subscriber records, complete communication history, direct messages, photographs, videos, and GPS location data connected to her son's phone number and email. Remember that Crump had already claimed messages were deleted from Nolan's phone. Now the family is going around every intermediary, straight to the servers where digital life is permanently stored. Whatever those platforms produce, timestamps, locations, conversations, will exist independent of anyone's memory and anyone's version of events. And third, the machinery of the official case itself. Roughly 60 witnesses have been interviewed. The district attorney has announced the case will go before a grand jury, which will decide whether anyone faces charges, and has defended keeping the evidence out of public view until that panel reviews it, calling it protection for the investigation's integrity. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, reviewing what has been made public, surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and notoriously dangerous currents around those barrier islands, concluded that the picture so far resembles an accident, while warning that more details could still emerge. The county coroner has acknowledged receiving drowning victims from those islands for years. Hold that assessment in one hand, and hold Mitchell's refusal to rule out foul play in the other. Both come from serious professionals. Both cannot be the final word. So here is the honest ledger of what remains open. Why did the boat return to the mainland without him? And do the friends' accounts, which Crump says contained contradictions about? Why he stayed behind, hold up against the digital records now under subpoena? What will the sealed state autopsy and the pending toxicology actually show? What did his phone contain? And what will 5 tech companies hand over? And what will 12 grand jurors decide once they see evidence the rest of us cannot? Every one of those questions has a date attached to it somewhere in the future. None of them has an answer tonight. And anyone telling you different is selling certainty they do not possess. This story is moving fast, so treat this video as a snapshot, not a final record. Check the pinned comment below, because that's where I'll keep the timeline updated the moment records unseal, findings drop, or the grand jury acts. What's accurate as I record, this may be incomplete by the time you watch it, and you deserve to know which is which. Strip away every expert, every filing, every viral clip, and what's left is a family setting a place at the table that stays empty and a locker room in Summit holding a jersey nobody will wear this season. He was supposed to be in training camp right now, running routes toward a division. One dream every coach believed was within reach. Instead, his mother is issuing subpoenas, and a grand jury is preparing to weigh his final hours. A young man sailed out on the 4th of July surrounded by friends, and everything he left behind has become evidence. The state's findings are coming. The toxicology is coming. The grand jury's decision is coming. And when each one lands, I'll break down exactly what it means. Confirmed, sourced, and straight. So if you're not subscribed to True Crime Victims yet, fix that right now. Tap the like button so this reaches people drowning in rumors, and turn on notifications, because the next document in this case could change everything. And you'll hear it here first.